So, how do we do this? How do we look at these several sentences that must fit together and become a paragraph? How do we dig in there and do that? One of the best methods is called a structural diagram or structural layout, structural diagram. When we can write out the structural diagram, we will see how the paragraph fits together as a paragraph. We'll see relationships between even words and phrases and sentences that make up that paragraph. In a structural diagram, we make visual these relationships. So there's 3 simple rules for making a structural diagram. You're going to be making some structural diagrams. So you need to pay attention to what these rules are. You're going to memorize these rules. Rule number 1, and we're on page about page 6 in the class notes. Rule number 1: each new idea starts at the left margin of that page. So if you see this is a new thought, you move it to the left margin. And you start your paragraph at the left margin. Okay, now that was rule number 1. Start the new idea at the left margin. Rule number 2, an idea that modifies a word is placed under that word but indented. Rule number 2 is an idea that modifies a word is placed under that word and indented. And the last rule, 3, is a series of nouns or a series of verbs or a series, these are listed in parallel under each other. So let's look at some examples. Here's rule number 1 with an example. The rule again is each new idea starts at the left margin of the page. And so here's our, he went to the store. She rode her bicycle. I read a book. Those are each of those are, that's 3 new ideas. When you write those down in a structural diagram, each one of those 3 sentences goes to the far left of the page, left of the margin. He went to the store. And then we hit return as we type, return. New sentence, she rode her bicycle. And then we hit return on the keyboard. I read a book. They're all new ideas. She rode her bicycle does not modify anything in the first sentence. It's a new idea. They're all 3 new ideas. Okay, that's rule number 1. Now rule number 2 is, and again, an idea that modifies a word is placed under that word but indented. So, example, here's our sentence. He went to the store that sells spices. Okay, now notice that sells spices is an expression that modifies what? Store. What kind of a store is it? Is it a big red store? I don't know. Is it a little store? Is it a store at the end of the street? I don't know any of that. All I know about this store is that store, he went to the store that sells spices. He went to the store which sells spices. So the expression that sells spices is underneath the word store but indented a little bit. In the middle, put under the middle of the word store, because that sells spices modifies store. Okay? So now the third rule, a series of nouns or a series of verbs, series are listed in parallel under each other. Okay, so watch this. He went to the store that sells spices. You know how to lay that out. That sells spices goes under store, but indented a little bit. So the beginning of the word that is at the underneath and in the middle of the word store. Do you see that? Now, he went to the store that sells spices, fruits, and tea. Spices, fruit, and tea is a series. And so they are listed in parallel under each other. Spices, fruit, and tea. So the S of spices, the F of fruit is directly under the S of spices. You see what I'm... And the T of tea is right under, is directly underneath. The spices, fruit, and tea are listed in parallel below those fruit and tea below spices. Let me give you another example. In the zoo, we saw alligators, crocodiles, and lizards. Okay. Alligators, crocodiles, that doesn't modify alligators. Crocodiles are crocodiles and alligators are alligators. Crocodiles is parallel to alligators. Crocodiles is parallel to alligators in meaning, and so it's written as a series. Alligators, and then right under that, crocodiles and lizards. Lizards doesn't explain anything about crocodiles. Those are three different animals that we saw, and they're listed in parallel. You can draw a straight line down from the A of alligators to the C of crocodiles to the L of lizards. It's a straight line. Okay? That's different from the previous rule. Remember the previous rule? He went to the store that sells spices. That sells spices modifies store. But alligators, crocodiles, and lizards don't, those words don't modify alligators. Well, here's another example. When we arrived at the beach, we ran, jogged, danced, and played. When we arrived at the beach, we ran, jogged, danced, and played. Those verbs, ran, jogged, danced, played, are written as a series in parallel, a list, parallel. Jogged doesn't modify ran. Danced doesn't modify jog. It's a parallel, 1, 2, 3, yeah. Four verbs. But then let's add a little bit more. Here's the sentence. When we arrived at the beach, we ran, drop down, jog, drop down, dance, drop down, and drop down, played in the water. Now, what does in the water do? In the water modifies played. In the water modifies played. And so, where is it? Under, but indented. Underplayed, but indented. That's rule number 2 coming into effect. Okay? You see the difference between 2 and 3? So let's make a complicated sentence. Ready? I'm going to read the whole sentence, then we'll break it down, lay it out as a structural diagram. Okay, ready? Here's the complicated sentence. I saw a boy riding a bicycle with red wheels and with green balloons covered with red dots and green circles. Okay, I made up this sentence, of course. You're not going to find that in the Bible. I saw a boy riding a bicycle. What does riding the bicycle do? Does it modify I? No, I'm not riding the bicycle. Who is riding the bicycle? The boy. So I saw a boy riding a bicycle. The expression riding a bicycle is under boy, but indented a little bit, because boy and riding are not a series. Riding a bicycle is modifying boy. So it's under but indented, under boy but indented to the middle of boy. Okay? The boy is riding a bicycle. Now, riding a bicycle. Now, what do with red wheels and with green balloons, what do those two things do? What has red wheels? Do I have red wheels? No, I don't have red wheels. Does the boy have red wheels? Did I see a boy with red wheels? No. I saw a boy riding a bicycle with red wheels. What does with red wheels do? It modifies bicycle, because it's the bicycle that has the red wheels. Yes? And with green balloons. Now, since you have with red wheels and with green balloons, you understand that the bicycle, not only does the bicycle have red wheels, the bicycle also has green balloons. Okay, so under bicycle, but indented with red wheels. Then parallel to with red wheels is with green balloons. With red wheels and with green balloons are both modifying bicycle. Can you see that? Now we go on. It says with green balloons covered with red dots. Am I covered with red dots? Dots, dots, dots. Is that what happened? Is the boy covered with red dots? No. What has red dots? Let me read the sentence again. I saw a boy riding a bicycle with red wheels and green balloons covered with red dots and green circles. What does covered with red dots modify? Does it modify saw? No. I didn't. Yeah, that would be like if you had a headache and you were seeing red dots. No, 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 no. Covered with red dots and green circles modifies the balloons. It must be the balloons that are covered with red dots and green circles. So, covered with red dots is under balloons but indented some. But you've got red dots and green circles. So, red dots and green circles, that's a series, and so they are written in parallel to each other. I hope you can see that. So again, 3 rules. Let's just review. Just three rules. Each new idea starts at the left margin of the page. An idea that modifies a word is placed under that word but indented. Like in the middle, below that word and in the middle of the word. And then a series of nouns or verbs, the series are listed in parallel under each other. Okay? So let's look at a biblical example now. Those were just made up fun words. Let's look at a biblical example now. We're looking at Ephesians 4:11 and 12. I'll read the whole thing first. It was he who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers, to prepare God's people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up. When you just read it like that, it's hard to grasp everything. But if we break it up into a structural diagram, it helps us to grasp what's going on here. So there's a new idea. Rule number 1 is new idea, push it to the left. Okay, it was he who gave. That is it. Goes to the far left margin. Now we've got he gave some to be apostles. Well, some to be apostles modifies the giving. Did he give apples? Did he give strawberries? Did he give bread? No, he gave what? He gave some to be apostles. So, some to be apostles modifies gave. Look back at rule number 2. Things that modify a word are under but indented to the below the word and in the middle of the word. Some to be apostles. Okay? Now, but it's not just some to be apostles. You have a series here. Some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers. So, it's a series, and according to rule number 3, a series like that are all listed in parallel under each other. The position in the diagram is dictated by some to be apostles. So you match some to be apostles, drop it down in parallel, some to be prophets, again down in parallel, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers. Okay, now the next thing it says is to prepare God's people for works of service. We have to ask ourselves the question, what is the expression to prepare God's people doing here? What's it doing? What's its role? What's its job in the sentence? You could shorten it, you could make it simpler by saying, it was he who gave some people. Let's read it like this. Let's just simplify it. It was he who gave some people to prepare God's people. To prepare God's people, what is it doing? Or I can ask, what does that phrase, to prepare God's people, what does it modify? I think it modifies the giving. Gave. Why? It tells something about the giving. Why did he give? He gave to prepare God's people. So, just like some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers are under and indented under gave, in the same column there, in the same vertical column, to prepare God's people is also explaining or modifying the verb gave. Okay? So we have to prepare God's people for works of service. What is for works of service doing? For works of service. Does for works of service modify God? No. For works of service modifies, tells the purpose of the preparing. What kind of preparing is this? Is this preparing to go shop in the marketplace? No. Is this preparing to cook dinner? No. It's preparing for the purpose of works of service. Therefore, for works of service is indented, is under the verb prepare, but in the middle, indented, so it's in the middle. And then the last one is, it says, for works of, let me read it, to prepare God's people for works of service so that the body of Christ might be built up. What is the job of so that the body of Christ might be built up? What is that doing in the sentence? It's a purpose. The purpose is so that the body of Christ might be built up, but what's it doing? What role is it fulfilling? What role is it taking in the way the sentence is built? So that the body of Christ might be built up is modifying prepare. Prepare. Why prepare? Why prepare God's people? So that the body of Christ might be built up. So that's a introduction to the process of doing a structural diagram. Why do we do structural diagrams? When you write a structural diagram out on a piece of paper or on your computer screen, it helps you to see the way the sentence is built. And of course, you don't have to limit yourself to one sentence. You can do several sentences and see how maybe the whole paragraph is built. It's very helpful. And we do this all the time. Whenever I see a verse in the Bible, I say, wait a minute, this is too complicated. What's going on here? I will, often on my computer screen, hit the return button and then tab, 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 how far over does it go? Hit the return, tab, 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 how far over does it go? Hit the return button, tab, tab, tab. So you can see the structure with your eyes. So that's the end of our lecture on this phase of observation and in particular structural diagram.